Ladies and gentlemen, it is finally time. We are currently up to the final chapter of the game, so our playthrough is at its end. As you may have guessed, something's different about this episode. I am recording this one live, and that's because the final chapter is actually so easy that there's not much point in commentating over it. It's a 2-turn guarantee clear basically, and so instead what I wanted to do is record this one live, and instead of immediately going into the chapter, we're just going to talk about our units and the run. So as for the run, I'm quite satisfied with it. I think we did a really good job. I think there are a lot of chapters that unfortunately had to be cleared by turtling and being very slow, but overall I'm satisfied with our results, and I think I did a pretty good job using the units that I had available to me. As for the hardest chapter in the game, after I think about it, I think that probably has to go to chapter 16X. I believe it's 16X, 16 or 17X. 16X, that's right. It's the one with the light arrows coming from the top. That chapter was absolutely ridiculous to try to figure out, and honestly, I hope I never have to do anything that difficult ever again. Other competitors for that title of hardest chapter would probably go to chapter 4, chapter 7, and I guess chapter 21 as well. The reason why 21 doesn't make the cut is because you can cheese it. I think if you were forced to play the intended route on chapter 21, it would easily take the #1 spot as hardest chapter in the game. But it's not. You can cheese it even without going around the reinforcement zones. If you have a warp staff, you can skip those. So that's going to be my ranking there. In terms of things that I would do differently, there's obviously a few maps that now I have knowledge of that I didn't at the time, that would allow me to have completed them more quickly, and there's plenty of things I could have done to be more efficient, but the biggest thing and the biggest stain on my run is the chapter 7 arena abusing. I'm really quite upset that I ever did that, for a few reasons. Obviously, the fact that I grinded 5 times as much as I needed to is really bad. My units did end up pretty jacked after that arena abuse session. Obviously, I wasn't like focusing on any 1 or 2 particular units, so no one became busted, but I still think it's really unfortunate that I grinded that at all, especially 5 times as much as I needed to. And in addition, during that grinding session was actually the first and only time I ever used save states during the playthrough. During the first run of that chapter, the first successful run, I actually wasn't using save states, and someone died in the arena, and so since then I decided to use save states during that arena, just so that I didn't have to restart the whole chapter just because someone got unlucky in the arena. Yeah, so overall that's something I would do differently. I would only, if I was going to grind it, obviously I'd make sure that I wasn't doing it 5 times as much as I needed to. But everything else in the run I'm fairly satisfied with. So let's skip all that boring stuff. What we want to do is we want to look at our units. So the only way for me to look at my units now is to go into the trial maps. And we can just click on this here. We don't actually have to go into it. Instead we'll just go to our pick our units part. Oops. So we're going to be going over all our units from the very start, and we're going to be, some of them are going to be compared to other units of similar stature, but most of them probably won't be. And we are going to look over things like average stats and such, and just their general performance. So Roy, our boy Roy, I personally thought he turned out pretty well, but if you look at his average stats, he's only very slightly above average. His strength is actually 4 points above average, which is quite good. But the rest of him is pretty much on the ball, you know, minus or plus a few stats here and there. Overall, I think Roy just needed to promote so much earlier. This isn't exactly a foreign opinion. Most people who play this game probably understand this. But if he was promoted in, say, like chapter 16-ish with a third of the game left, he just would have been so much better. And I think if they made the sealed sword have infinite uses, or like more uses than it has, maybe like 50-ish, I think he could have been way better of a lord, and maybe more people would actually bother trying him out. Most of the time when people play through this game, they just put him in saddlebags and use the rest of their units to beat the chapter, which is a shame. I like the idea of using the Lord character throughout the playthrough, but he really is pretty mediocre. Next, we have Lilina. So, Lilina was one of my favourite units to use during this run, and I thought she would be good, and she was good. Look at these stats. Look how fabulous she is. We know how she tears through wyverns and such. Looking at her averages, she is also pretty much average. She's got a bit more than an average unit of her level though. She's got roughly 1 or 2 points higher than average for her level. And in addition, you have to remember she was given an angelic robe, so she has only 1 HP above average for her level if you ignore that +7 that we got from the angelic robe. But overall, Lilina was fantastic to use. I'm really glad I got her. Her utility is unmatched with that healing. She heals for so much. Her damage is extremely high. Her speed is high enough to double things that matter. And I've got no complaints. Like, she wasn't even hard to raise. I'm pretty sure you get her at level 1 and she wasn't hard or difficult to raise at all. No problems with Lilina. Probably one of the better units in the entire run. Maybe second, maybe third best. Probably third best overall. Really, really solid. Next, oh boy, Walt. Yeah, Walt the Punished Archer. The man who I've ragged on throughout this entire playthrough. I'm sorry, my dude, but you really are not very good. Funnily enough, looking at his stats, he's not actually anywhere near as strength screwed as I originally thought him to be. His strength is actually completely on the dot average for his level right now. I don't know how that's possible because he didn't level up strength for like... I think out of the 17 levels he got while unpromoted, he got strength like 5 times maybe. So I don't know how the hell he's at average, but somehow he's average, and the rest of his stats are pretty average as well. Yeah, he's pretty much on the ball average, although he's missing a few points of res. I just wanted to quickly compare him to Igreen, who is down here somewhere. There she is. So Igreen is a pre-promote, and I wanted to compare them because I think it's really interesting. Obviously Walt has significantly higher HP at 50, but remember Walt is currently level 17 after promotion, whereas Igreen's level 1, so obviously Igreen has room to grow here, and that's what I'm trying to illustrate. If you look at their stats, Igreen is barely worse than Walt in most ways. She actually has just as much defense as my Walt, as well as significantly more res, and her speed and strength are pretty much there. I'd imagine that she would be better than Walt if we used her. I thought it was really interesting to compare them because Walt's one of those characters you get literally in chapter 1, and to see that a pre-promote you're given only probably like halfway through the game would be so good compared to him, it's just kind of crazy, and it illustrates, I think this game has a problem with pre-promotes where they're actually just too good for their own good. I think in a regular playthrough there is no reason to use Walt over Igreen, even if you've been using him throughout the entire playthrough. Like, she doesn't require a promotion item, so you could sell any of the Orion's bolts you have, and she's got significantly better res, as I mentioned. She's already good enough to take on like wyverns and such. I just thought that would be interesting to point out. So while Walt definitely did come through for me towards the last few chapters where all those wyverns are crawling around, Igreen would have been just as good, if not better, and probably Klein would be similar as well, although at this point Klein has outdated stats compared to both of them. Moving on here to Ward. Easily the worst unit in the entire run. I actually had no idea just how bad he would be, and looking at his stats you wouldn't even think that, but he's honest to god fairly unusable. I have no idea how people would actually use this guy on average. He's just terrible. That speed means that he's going to get doubled by everything on God's green earth, and despite the HP he has, his defense is not especially fantastic. 12 is kind of average, it's kind of okay at this point in the game. He just folds. He just folds on everything. He doesn't hit anything. That's not really a problem that's necessarily exclusive to him. Most axe units in this game have that problem. But even so, he's just so hard to work around. And if I had to guess, out of all the restarts that I've done on any maps, I'd imagine that he's probably been the cause of the most compared to all the rest of my units. So the unit I wanted to compare him to was Bartray. Bartray again joins pre-promoted, and if you look at their stats, they're very, very similar. Bartray's already level 2 and my ward is level 17. No, he's level 7, sorry, he promoted at level 17. And if you look at their stats, they're extremely similar, except I'd honest to God say Bartray is better, just because he has 10 speed. Keep in mind, obviously this Bartray is actually a few levels lower than Ward, so Bartray has room to catch up in those few levels. And I think being at 10 speed would probably be right at that threshold where some things would stop doubling you, and that's super duper important. It's the one reason why Ward is Ward is significantly worse than Garrett. They're different classes, but that's why I wanted to compare him to Bartray, because they are the same class. Bartray is just better. Bartray comes pre-promoted, and he is better than Ward. Obviously his growth rates are probably worse, but I mean, looking at their stats, they're so comparable. Like, obviously Ward has more skill, sure, but they're very, very similar for what they are, and considering you don't have to spend any time using or raising Bartray before you get him, I just think he's a better choice overall. Next up, we have Garrett, up here somewhere. There you are. So Garrett actually didn't get that much of a chance to grow. He hasn't leveled up much at all. I think he's leveled up a maximum of 3 times since we got him, since he is also a pre-promote. So his averages are not really worth looking at. He's pretty much average across the board. He's been okay. I think Garrett's one of those units that people who've never used him will look at and call underrated. They'll look purely at the stats and they'll say, yeah, this dude's more decent than people give him credit for. I personally don't think that's true. I think he's perfectly serviceable for what he is, but he's not good by any stretch of the imagination. Obviously he has hit rate issues. He does have issues with getting doubled by some things, although he's significantly better at that than Ward is. For example, he will get doubled by Wyvern Lords, and they will kill him in 1 round if he doesn't dodge at least once. So that's just an example of where he falls apart. And looking at the rest of his stats, there's nothing too fantastic. I mean, obviously strength is a highlight, as it is with this character archetype. I think in this particular game, it would have been fair to give Berserkers like a 40% crit bonus as opposed to the 31. He really kind of does need the crits to do anything reliable. And without them, he's just really kind of a mediocre combat unit. Not a fan, and probably won't be reusing him anytime I replay this game. Moving on, Milady. Oh, I love this unit. Look at her. Look at those stats. Just look. Feast your eyes on her. She's crazy good. Crazy, crazy good. There's a bunch of factors that make her really, really good. Obviously, hard mode bonuses play into it. Then you have to consider she joins at a level that is almost ripe for promotion, so if you wanted to, you could promote her right away. And then you just look at her stats and her growths and such. They're just fantastic. 50% strength. I think she has 45% speed or something like that. 40% speed, 35% speed, something like that. It's decent. It's decent. And my Milady is actually fairly blessed. Out of all the units in my run, she's probably the one with the highest deviation above standard. She's got 7 points of HP more than average, 2 points of strength, 1 point of strength more than average, and 3 points of defense more than average, so that's pretty good. She actually does, of course, have the speed wings. She was given speed wings at some point, so her speed is actually 2 points lower than average, not accounting for the speed wings. But even so, she still doubles most things you need her to double, and she's going to do a lot of damage doing it. I mean, I don't really need to explain to you why this unit's so good. She's also one of the tankiest units on my team. The only unit on my entire team that has more defense, or even comparable defense, is Boars. But Boars gets doubled, and Milady doesn't. So she's just really, really fantastic. I mean, she doesn't even need a Delphi shield. She can mostly just shrug off archers. Super good. Really glad we got her. Really, really glad. I wish she had a little bit more aid, but that's my only complaint, and I'm pretty sure that's because she's a female, and female units get less aid in Fire Emblem. Moving on here. Holy crap, Marcus. This dude is crazy. Look at him. I mean, those stats aren't actually anything too impressive, especially for a capped paladin, but when you consider this dude is supposed to have fallen off in like chapter 10, and yet here he is still being competitive with the rest of the units on my team, I would say Marcus was easily the second most useful unit on the entire team just throughout the playthrough. He's been here since the start, and he's been useful since the start for basically everything in every chapter ever. I mean, Lance and Marcus are the dream team. They're the duo that does. They just do everything that I want them to do. And while Marcus's speed and strength definitely fell off towards the end, it's always been just enough to still be useful. So I'm very proud of this unit, and I'm very glad I was given him. Comparing him stat-wise, he's relatively blessed. Yeah, I would say he has 3 points of strength higher than average, which is really, really good, and obviously helped him remain competitive. I mean, 13 strength at level 20 promoted is really kind of pitiful. He also has 3 points of speed higher than average, which is also really, really good. But then you do have to consider that he has been fed the most stat boosters of any of my units in the entire run through. So he's actually been given 2 speed, 4 defense, and 2 strength. So if you remove those, he becomes significantly more in line with his averages. But he's still better than average. So what can I say? The dude just doesn't die. Dude will probably be teaching Roy's grandkids how to use lances. I think I already made that joke in the last part, actually, so let's move on. Alright, next unit. Who have we got? Oh yeah, I was going to compare him to Zealot, but screw it, who cares. Moving on. Boars. Where's my boy Boars? Here he is. Okay, God. So this is actually the first and only Armor Knight I've ever used in any playthrough of Fire Emblem, the class, and its hang-ups have never been appealing to me. And after using him, my opinion has not changed. Using him was extremely difficult throughout most of the game. It didn't help that he didn't have access to a promotion item for a long time. But just in general, the low movement of the armor class is just terrible. It's just awful, and it's really not fit for most chapters. He admittedly did have some standout chapters where he did a lot of work for us. But those are relatively few and far between, and overall I'd say on average he was a liability rather than an asset most of the time. There are definitely chapters where he helped a lot, but that is my opinion on him most of the time, and you wouldn't think so looking at the stats necessarily. High defense, decent speed, good strength, but honestly he has hit rate problems. He can't get rescued, he folds in half when being fought by a mage, and even, I mean, there are so many high strength enemies in this game. 23 strength, I mean, yeah, 23 defense looks impressive, but when you consider that like promoted wyverns have like base 25 plus a silver lance, you know, it doesn't look too good for him. The defense really just doesn't mean all that much when the enemies you fight are that strong. So I really can't recommend this unit. And in addition, if you compare him to his closest comparison, which is Douglas, if you remember, Douglas is the Armor Knight that died in Chapter 16X, on the Arrow of Light chapter. Douglas is pretty much better than Boars. Douglas has roughly, he's actually got more strength at base, so level 8, than Boars has now. And he is slightly slower and has slightly less defenses, but when you consider that I had to use boars throughout the entire game, literally since chapter 1, to get into these stats, it's just not worth it. Douglas is almost just as good, if not a little bit better in some areas, and he's free. So, I can't recommend this unit at all. I mean, probably better than Wendy, God knows. Probably better than Bath, God knows. But still, really not good. Very polarizing. I can't say he's the worst unit in my squad, but he's far from being the best. Moving on to Nime. Nime's not really got any averages worth looking at because she joins with 2 levels left until cap, so who really cares? So just looking at the unit as a unit, I really enjoyed her, but I also learned her limitations. As I mentioned it a few chapters ago, she's just really frail. I mean, look at that HP and defense. She's got like 31 physical bulk. I'm bad at math, shut up. She just folds to anything physical. It makes her really hard to use sometimes because there are maps like, for example, chapter 21, where wyverns are just flying about and they're going to fly past any defensive formations you could have created, and they're going to target people, so she has to stand really far back. However, she does have the grace of being pretty much the best staff unit on my team. Her magic is huge for someone who's given to you for free, so she's got huge warp range, really good at using status staves like Berserk and Sleep. She's really good at healing. I think utility-wise, she's fantastic. Really good staff bot. But when it comes to combat, it's better to use other people, and it can be really hard to keep her alive. But overall, I think she's really good. I'm glad we got her. She does join a bit late, but such is life. And I would compare her to someone like Roy or Sophia, and, you know, compare the averages, but I don't think there's much point. Nime clearly isn't designed as a combat unit. She's supposed to be utility. She's supposed to provide staff utility. She's got the staff rank. She's got the magic. That's really what she's for, and that's what she does, and she's good at it. Moving on, Rutger. Oh wow, Rutger. I really like this dude. Really like him. I did before, I do now. Really solid unit. Despite being footlocked and swordlocked, he's managed to be useful in basically every chapter ever, because everything that he attacks will die, and in addition he has some of the better hit rates out of my entire army. I really like the dude. There's not much to say, like the stats speak for themselves. Super strong, super fast, relatively durable. I mean, he's got really high HP, so that helps to offset his kinda average defenses. But like, he's got some of the higher res in my army, good at taking on mages, can use a bunch of weapons that are really good. Obviously the crit is a huge factor as to why he's good. That natural 30% crit on stuff is just really fantastic. My only real complaint with Rutger is that he faces crit sometimes, and again, it's usually not too much, but I've reiterated enough times at this point as to why I don't trust this dude around low percent crits, so I'll just let that speak for itself. If we're looking at averages, my Rutger is actually... he's got 3 points of strength higher than average and 3 points of speed lower than average, so that, you know, make of that what you will. I personally think I'd rather have this Rutger than an average Rutger, because 26 speed already doubles everything that matters. 29 is kind of overkill. And 23 strength is better than 20, obviously. You're going to kill more stuff. So I honestly like this Rutger better than an average Rutger. He's really good, although he does actually have slightly less bulk than an average Rutger. No problems though. No problems with this unit, apart from that low percent crit stuff. Let's move on to my favourite unit of the run, the god himself, the god slayer himself, Lance. Look at this dude. This dude carried the entire run. No doubt about it, he was easily the single best and most useful unit the entire run. He does everything. He doesn't die. He kills. He's got that move. He can rescue. He doubles everything. He's got good strength. He's got huge HP. Like, the dude just has next to zero flaws. If there is any flaw that I could point out, it's that his strength could serve to be higher. But who cares, man? He does everything you need him to do. absolutely fantastic. The run would be next to impossible without him. And that's why I wanted to bring up this. So if you compare him to Percival, remember Percival is the dude we killed back in, I think it's chapter 13-ish, before he would go to join us in the same chapter that Garrett joins you, except of course we couldn't recruit him. At base, so level 5, Percival is better than Lance. At base, Percival has 50 HP, 20 strength, 16 skill, 20 speed, 14 luck, 15 def, and 12 res. That is already better than most of Lance's stats. Obviously Lance is faster. That's the main thing that Lance has over Percival. But again, reminder that Percival is at level 5 and this Lance is at level 20. So in 15 levels it's very possible that Percival could have gotten the speed required to match Lance right now. And especially with, if you were willing to give him like speed wings or whatever, he would easily reach cap. Because his speed growth isn't that bad. I'm not ragging on Lance, that's not my intention. My point is just to point out that Percival is broken, and, you know, I mean, Lance made this game bearable, but I think Percival would have made this game easy if we were able to get him. So that's kind of the difference between them. I just wanted to point it out. Obviously Lance was extremely instrumental in the entire playthrough, and it's a real shame we couldn't bring him to the last 2 chapters. I think he really deserved to be able to see the boss, but unfortunately that was not to be. 2 units left to talk about. Next one is Sue. Sue is a unit that I don't really have any opinions on. She joins at level 1, and I mean, she's serviceable. Look at her. Her stats are good, her speed is great, her attack is alright, got decent bulk, decent HP. She's just overall decent. I'd personally rate her higher than Walt. I think she's more consistent, she doubles more, she's got higher accuracy, and she's only a few points weaker than Walt, although she is definitely physically frailer. She does also fight mages better because of that higher res. Again, I don't really have an opinion on this unit. She's fine. She's serviceable. I think Shin would probably be better. Diane would probably fill your needs. But for what she is, she's fine. Completely serviceable, but very, very average. I don't really care about her whatsoever, even after using her throughout most of the game. And the last unit to talk about is Saul. Staff bot. he's a staff bot, and that's all there really is to it. If you actually look at his stats, my Saul is kind of under the average. He has roughly the same average magic, but he's definitely slower. He's got less skill, less defense. He's got slightly higher res, but I mean, he's a staff bot. None of that stuff really matters. I could probably count the amount of times I actually attacked with this dude on one hand. And we've had him since like chapter 5, I think. So he's a staff bot. He does that well. He heals well. Glad to have him. Very, very useful, but not much to say. The most direct comparison to him would be Yodel, and Yodel is actually better than Saul. He's slower, for sure, definitely slower, but he has higher magic, higher res by a lot. He's basically just a slightly higher magic and res Yodel. I mean, slightly higher magic and res Saul. But of course you do get him in chapter 21 when the game's almost over, so, you know, make of that what you will. He's fine. He's a good unit. Could use a horse, that would make him better, but he's fine. So that's pretty much everybody. And all that's really left at this point is to actually fight the boss. So I'm gonna make a brief cut here, and we're gonna get into the final chapter. Here we are, the final chapter. This is it. This is the end of the run, right here, right now. As I mentioned before, this chapter is incredibly easy, so I didn't feel the need to post-commentate it. But I really can't believe this is it. Melody's gonna send us off with one final level up. Doesn't matter, obviously. I was very happy to get the chance to play through this. I've had a lot of fun so far. It's been a pretty great time, honestly. Definitely chapters that were really, really annoying, but I think overall I really enjoyed the challenge of getting to use this team. It was really, really cool to come up with some alternative strategies for maps that were otherwise quite standard. But this is it. After this, I'm going to let the credits and such play. Just because, you know, you might be interested in that, but after we kill Idun, I don't really have anything left to say. I've said pretty much all I want to about this run, and about my units. The only thing left to say is I may or may not be doing a similar kind of run to this in FE7 or 8 sometime soon. Who knows? I'll consider it. But if that doesn't happen, this will be the last time you'll hear from me for quite some time, so I wanted to thank you so much for watching my Fire Emblem 6 hard mode PMU run. This has been Banana, and I guess I'll see you in the next one.